the exploration of how we were going to achieve this target of carbon neutral new buildings was a very interesting discussion. We had about 6 meetings with our external advisory committee where we got really quite deep into the subject matter. And then we actually had a 1-day mediated session that was hosted by the Carbon Talks, where they locked us in a room for 8 hours, and it was some of the brightest people in North America were talking about how we would achieve this goal. And what we came up with was this framework, which I call changing the hardware and software of our communities. What we know is that in an urban environment, the only projects to date that have achieved carbon neutral building status have done it because they've been part of a district energy network. And they haven't been able to do it on their own. And it actually looks more and more that when you actually looking at any of the various resource usage areas that are associated with the built environment, whether it's rainwater management or water treatment or energy or cooling, I guess cooling could be lumped in with energy, that it's very difficult to meet it within your own site boundaries. So this idea of developing hardware, which may be infrastructure, which may be buildings, but then supporting that with software, which could be things like new financing tools, new business models, new ways of addressing building occupants, or people who may be purchasing buildings. So providing maybe a new operating system to the high-performance hardware we're putting out there is also part of the solution. So we kind of divided this up into sort of 2 areas. So when we're talking about how do we change the hardware of our communities to achieve carbon neutral new buildings by 2020, we're talking about new buildings that are super energy efficient. We're talking about doing retrofits on existing buildings. We're talking about developing district energy centers and the necessary infrastructure to distribute that energy. We're talking about on-site renewables and smart metering and grids. We're talking about software. I already mentioned financing tools, but incentives, micro-utility models, or really any other business model that allows people to finance either energy efficiency or renewable energy on site. New ways of working with building occupants, because we realize we haven't actually succeeded in building a green building once we've completed it and put the plaque on it. We've only succeeded in building a green building once the occupants in it are engaged in conservation-based behavior. So, and optimizing that building, I would say as well. And then actually, providing a way for people to get an understanding of what's actually happening in the built environment, what's happening with these buildings, so they can make informed choices, so we can make informed valuations of these buildings. And then also providing a way to, whether it's through social networking or some other platform, that people can get access to the information they need that is beyond just sort of like either purchasing a unit or a building, but how do we actually find maybe that energy efficient fixture that we need to buy, or how do we compete with our neighbors to be more energy efficient than the Joneses, for example. We then lumped these into a group of strategies because we put it back into sort of more boring bureaucratic terms. We came up with these areas that were identified for action over the next 10 years, whether starting with regulation, moving through incentives and financing tools. When we talk about capacity building, we're talking about pilot projects, but we're also talking about those new financing models and also training projects. User engagement, we've got a couple pilots related to that. I can get into that in a minute if we like. And then also looking at large-scale development of district energy. One of the pilot projects we've developed to date is the Net Zero building in Southeast Falls Creek. This is a carbon neutral building. It's a building that harvests energy from the sun, turns that into heat. It also harvests energy from the grocery store below it and takes the waste heat from that grocery store. The only drawback of that is all the heat in your building tends to smell like that barbecue chicken they make in grocery stores, so you're always hungry. No, I'm just kidding. It's a hydronic what what was really interesting about this building, what we found out by building this building, was that the buildings of tomorrow, I mean, this building does look a little bit zoomy with the solar energy on top of it, but solar thermal generation is actually about a 30-year-old mass market technology. I mean, you go to places in like Mexico and where have you, you can see rooftops littered with solar hot water, or people even who have pools here have that. And we found that I guess what I'm trying to say is that the buildings of tomorrow really are the buildings kind of yesterday, in that they have really good, efficient envelopes where they manage their glazing, they're optimized for daylighting, they have simple technologies that produce the biggest benefits for the environments that they're in, and I guess they're connected. So when I talked, we had a question at the beginning about how do we move towards carbon positive buildings or carbon positive communities. Well, the red dot over there is the net zero building. And the way it achieves its net zero status is by generating more heat energy than it can ever possibly need. And it sells off that surplus heat energy back to this district, and it uses that to offset its electricity demands. And we did that because putting a photovoltaic array on the rooftop, there was just no economics in it. You can imagine that the solar thermal array we have on there is, it cost about $1.2 million bucks, and it is about 60% efficient at turning solar energy into heat. If we were going to put a PV array, well, first of all, we didn't have enough rooftop for it almost on the western side of the village where we had access to rooftops at a time of construction. But it was going to cost us about $10 million, and those solar panels were between 12 and 14% efficient. So when you actually look at investment bang for buck in terms of achieving this, and really you're offsetting what is largely carbon neutral electricity when you're doing that. So by turning to a thermal energy solution, we're directly offsetting any natural gas that will be burnt here at our community energy center to top up that heat. But what's really interesting we found about this was that while this building is achieving its own goals of selling renewable energy back to the grid to achieve its carbon neutral status, it's actually greening the network that it's a part of, right? Because it's actually contributing solar-fed energy back into this district energy system, thereby making the system better. So it's actually an interesting paradigm shift, because by building one super green building here, we haven't made ourselves less bad, we've actually made ourselves more good. We've actually improved the resiliency of the system and the capacity of the system to deliver green energy. So I think that's actually how we're going to try to address your question, how we might get there in the future. Another project we're working on the capacity building side is a partnership we've done with Embers. They're a downtown east side nonprofit, and we've invested in them to have to build a retrofit weatherization and energy efficiency company, essentially. It's an enterprising nonprofit model. And this fall, we've done about 60 homes. We funded some of their startup capital, made some connections with the utilities to get some of the hardware necessary, sent them down to Bellingham, Washington to get trained up by the best people there are in the business around weatherization and air tightness improvements. And it's been successful enough that we think that we've got a viable business model that we're going to do a formal RFP to throw out to get a permanent program in place for 2011. Now, what's interesting about this is that weatherization and improvement of air tightness is the number one thing you can do to improve energy efficiency in your home, and probably also in the multi-unit residential sector. It's up there as well too. But there are 0 companies in the Lower Mainland that do it right now. There's a well-developed market in Portland and in Seattle and in the Pacific Northwest. But right now we have a unique opportunity to take people who typically have barriers at getting employment opportunities, train them up and provide them access to what we feel will be a huge emerging market in a job skill area that's typically low threshold and allows that entry to employment. So kind of an interesting feel-good story. Something else that we're doing that we've gotten started on to achieve one of those 6 strategy areas we've talked about is our community-wide energy strategy. So this is just sort of a neat map. It's building up to probably the most interesting map you're going to see in the next 3 weeks, I'll say. So wait for it. All right. We've mapped in red right there the existing legacy natural gas-fed steam systems we have in the City of Vancouver. We've overlaid that with the green areas, which are large consolidated pieces of land that are affected by our large sites for green rezoning policy, where we now require that any site larger than 2.5 acres must give us a district energy feasibility study to look at the possibility of developing low carbon district energy on that site. You can see a nice sort of continuum that goes down the Cambie corridor there. We overlaid that with working with Terrace and Gas to map out where existing and future heat loads are going to be within the City of Vancouver. So you can sort of see on, it's kind of a bit of an eye chart, but the grid kind of shows you where the high heat loads currently are within the City of Vancouver. And then where these circles are is where we're projecting future high density nodes of heat. So you can see down here at East Fraser Lands, that's going to be a tremendous area for growth. But you can definitely see in the downtown core, you know, what we thought was largely built out. There is huge capacity there and huge potential future demand for heat loads. So what this is able to do it, here it is. Here's the most, here. So drink it in, get excited. But when you overlay these two things together in the purples, we've kind of laid out where these high potential future heat loads are. We overlay those with the potential for where we can develop low-cost district energy systems and where our current legacy steam systems are. And you can see that there's some great potential to start building a district energy network here, because what you need in order to develop district energy are high load density. So that's typically, you know, we need high nodes of density around where we're going to develop district energy. So you have lots of paying customers to help capitalize that investment. And we can achieve that on a lot of these rezoning sites. You need a lot of diversity of loads. You need people who are using energy at different times of the day, so commercial customers as well as residential customers. And you need that load to come on like tomorrow, because the faster you can get those customers online, the faster they can start paying those bills, the faster you can get the recuperation on your investment. So you can see that where we're about to have a lot of development on Cambie Street here, and where we currently have a legacy steam system, if we can actually switch these two legacy steam systems over, and if we're successful in getting, you know, half of the district energy systems that we think that look viable on the Cambie corridor or the Main Street corridor going, that we're going to be well on our way to actually developing a district energy network within the City of Vancouver. So I only had about 15 minutes here, so I'm just going to kind of, you know, if you're curious more about what we're doing in terms of next steps in terms of Green City and what have you, you know, this is our website address if you want to talk not only about my subject area, about any of the 10 goal areas. We can also get out there and we can also provide talks like this to your group or organization if you want to know more. We've also got the various website addresses, Twitter presence, Facebook, what have you, if you also want to follow us.